I'm delighted to welcome Google's Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist, Vint Cerf. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, and welcome everyone. This is exactly one of the main purposes for having an office here in Washington, is to engage people like you in discussions like this, especially about policy issues that potentially affect our businesses and yours and our respective welfare as users of the internet. You want me to move over here? Please put this microphone up your left nostril. Okay, I know how to do that. Let me do two things. First of all, I thought it would be worth giving you a little bit of a framework in which to receive the discussions that will be coming from our two speakers, and I hope subsequently the interactions that take place with you. Let me start out by making an observation about the internet and its design. It was intended to be an open system, an openly accessible system that could evolve its standards and could allow anyone who could pay to get access to the net to get onto it and use it any way they wanted to. It's been important that this open information ecology stay that way, because historically the economic engine which has driven the network for the last 20 years, since it became commercially accessible, has been based on this open ability to try things out without permission, sort of permission-free networking. And companies like Yahoo and Google and Amazon and eBay and Skype and so on all got their start by trying things out without having to get permission from one or more ISPs before they could do it. And it's that openness and ability to support innovation which has made the internet such an interesting environment. Of course, it also turns out that this openness produces some risk factors, because the open accessibility of the net also opens up opportunities for abuse. And this is an area where Jonathan and Larry, whom I will introduce in a moment, are going to address, and something that we should all be discussing. So those risk factors are quite real, and they're global in scope. The internet is global. It doesn't really notice international boundaries, although people have tried to project those international boundaries on it for various and sundry purposes. The trouble here is that we have risks. People generate malware. They generate worms and viruses and Trojan horses. They create botnet armies that can be used to generate spam or to launch denial of service attacks. We have to find a way to mitigate that. Well, there are only a few ways to approach the mitigation. I'll be interested, since I haven't read Jonathan's book yet, to see whether we align or not on this view. But I see only three basic mechanisms that will work. One of them is to use technical means to prevent the abuse, to literally inhibit it. But that doesn't always work. And so in the absence of an ability to absolutely prevent an abuse, the next opportunity you have is to at least detect it and to say, we have decided that certain activities are considered unacceptable, socially unacceptable, and if we detect that you're doing something and we can figure out who you are, there will be consequences. Now, this is made very difficult to implement in some cases because it might be hard to figure out where the source of the abuse actually is and to localize it to a human being, but that is the next natural step, is detection and mitigation. Or otherwise sometimes known as punishment. But then even if you can't do that, there is a third step that you can take, and that's moral suasion, to just try to teach people that there are certain things you shouldn't do. And although that sounds like a weak force, it's a little bit like gravity. Gravity is very weak, and yet en masse it's really powerful. And so we shouldn't discard that as a third way of going. Why do I think these are trying to consume me now? All right. So I hope at least a little bit of what I said earlier got through to the rest of the room. Anyway, so moral suasion is the last of the three ways in which one can go about dealing with some of these abusive problems. The thing which I find the most intriguing about all this is that because the internet is global in scope, and because it's relatively insensitive to national boundaries, if we are going to have effective means of mitigation, we're going to have some common agreements on values and what it is that we consider appropriate or inappropriate use of the net. We're never going to have uniformity. Cultures vary, national rules vary, and business practices vary. But unless we have the ability to go after abusers on an international scale, we will always have the open possibility that someone will be doing something that isn't considered acceptable somewhere to a party that and that someone can't be reached. So I think we're going to end up looking for international agreements, maybe even treaties of some kind, in which certain classes of behavior are uniformly considered inappropriate. I would reference the law of the sea, and those of you who know about it will cringe and know it took 20 years to produce and that it involved a lot of jockeying, compromising of national interests. The law of the net may turn out to be a similar kind of tough exercise, and yet it's my view that in the long run that may turn out to be the only mechanism by which we can introduce mitigation on a global scale using legal mechanisms to enforce the policies. That still doesn't leave out it still leaves us with the opportunity to use moral suasion and to use technical means to inhibit some of the abusive behavior. So let me stop there.
We just lost audio.
We're going to get on that.
Okay, hang on one. Jonathan promises to do that. So let me just tell you a little bit about our speakers today. I know you didn't come to listen to their bios, you came to listen to what they have to say. Jonathan is the Professor of Internet Governance and Regulation at Oxford University, and he's the co-founder of Harvard's Berkman Center. It seems to me that I've had a number of interactions with Jonathan, all of which have been, in my view, interesting and productive. Some of them have involved, for example, the Stop Badware initiative, in which we try to identify sources of malware that might be downloaded into your machine. So, Jonathan, thank you for those efforts. Our other speaker is Larry Lessig, and he's a professor of law at Stanford University and founder of the school's Center for Internet and Society. He's also the author of a number of different books that intersect the topics of cyberspace and law and policy, including a book called Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, Future of Ideas and Free Culture. An important other element that I want to acknowledge Larry's contribution is the Creative Commons construct, which is an alternative view of the protection of intellectual property, giving a lot more flexibility to the holders and producers of that policy. So we're going to hear both from Jonathan and from Larry. Jonathan's written this book, which I have not yet read, and so and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So I'm very interested, Jonathan, to know what your view is of the problems that we've tried to outline. So, Jonathan, without further comment, it's your opportunity. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vint, for that introduction. Thank you, Stephen, from the Family Online Safety Institute, Gigi from Public Knowledge, Alan from Google for organizing this, especially being generous with the space while it's still manifestly under construction. I will say, though, that your Ethernet duct is the thickest I've ever seen. It's just incredible bandwidth you guys have here. And I wanted to give a special greeting to our friends on the International Space Station. It's delightful to have you overhead. So, in North Korea, the radios by law must be tuned to one of only 3 channels, and the radios themselves can't be retuned by their holders. It's like the Kim Jong-il Party Hour, the Kim Il-sung Reflection Hour, and Rhythm and Blues. And in South Korea, there are actually some people who are thinking about having solar-powered radios, and ones that aren't limited that way, and then actually tying them to helium balloons and floating them across the demilitarized zone in order to give the North Koreans, radio-free world. And I just want to open by having you think about that fact as I now tell you a little bit about what I see as trajectories for our own consumer information technology. So I've got 4 parts. This is part 0. From sterile to generative, a historic trajectory that moves our technologies between these 2 poles that I'll explain. So I promised history. This is Herman Hollerith, and in 1880, he was a clerk for the United States Census Bureau. It was his job in this city to count the number of people in the United States, which was, despite the fact there were many fewer people then, an extraordinarily boring job. And he tried to think of ways to do it better, and he was inspired by these two things. On the left, the Jacquard loom, which has big holes that tell the threads where they should end up in the carpet, and this, a simple train ticket through which a single hole punch could indicate both the privileges and restrictions of the holder. And with that, he got the idea of having punch cards that census interviewers could use as they talk to people, and they could punch holes to indicate your nationality and your spouse's nationality and everything else, and then they would be deposited into this machine that he designed, an automatic tabulation machine, for which electricity would go through the holes and increment counters up here, one for each possible hole that you might have. This was a genius idea, and for the 1890 census, it cut the time required to do it from 7 years to 2.5 years, which was good because it was getting dangerously close to the 10-year interval at which the census was taken. Now, he was also a genius entrepreneur. He didn't sell these machines to the US government. He rented them at a cost of $50,000 per machine per year. Remember, 1890, the dollar meant something, and that was like a serious fee for him. Now, in exchange, it was his responsibility to make sure that the count worked. If there were any problems, you had the equivalent in 1890 of a toll-free number to call and demand redress from Herman Hollerith and his company. A great technology, but one mediated through his company. Now, he wasn't much of an ad man, so it was called the Automatic Tabulating Machine Company, but it merged with other companies and eventually became International Business Machines. And after a detour into the sale of Browning semi-automatic rifles in the early 20th century, it returned to pure business, and this card is the direct ancestor of this card, which when you put it into stacks like this, complete with the diagonal lines so that if a frenemy of yours should scatter them across the floor, you'd have a hope of reassembling them in the right order, get fed into machines like this, the IBM System 360. This is a machine that screams out, "Don't come near me," right? You don't need a sticker on it that's like warranty void if sticker removed. It's like, wow, you will die if you don't know what you're doing. So this machine was generic in the sense that depending on what was on those cards, it would do anything you wanted. It could count people, it could run a bank system, it could keep the railroads running on time. However, it needed interference by the same kinds of people that Herman Hollerith employed a century earlier in order for you to get near it. Even if you were a business paying for this machine, there would be IBM employees that actually programmed it, and they would be the ones to solve your business problems specified through very formal committees and such. And as a result, despite the fact that it's general purpose, I still say it's essentially a sterile technology, one not capable of doing surprising new things without the help of men in white lab coats. So another technology from the 20th century, also what I would call sterile. This is the Frieden Flexowriter. It's like a Royal typewriter, except it has this thing along the left where you can thread a tape. And as you type, holes appear in the tape. You put the tape back through, and like a player piano, it will type out whatever you have. A great machine. It says, "Come near me, you can use me." It's meant for end users. There's nobody in the middle. However, it's not reconfigurable. What it will do the day you throw it away is exactly the same as what it did the day you first took it out of the box. Now, this machine had its own descendants. This is a Flexowriter from the 60s after Burroughs bought it. Here's a version that should soon be appearing on your screen from Brother. I don't know if anybody remembers writing a term paper on the Brother smart word processor. And you'd take this thing out of the box, power it up, and there's the main menu. Everything you could want to do with modern information technology in a convenient amber grid. There's word processing, address book, and yes, desktop reference. And of course, any of these buttons, while it's providing you with a variety, they stay the way they are from the time you have the machine. And what they are, driven by market forces, but mediated through Brother as it competes with other entities, trying to figure out what you want and then offering it to you as a corporate package. This all changed in 1977. Video from the era is scarce, but here is a image of Steve Jobs at the West Coast Computer Fair with an E on the end, described as 10,000 walking, talking computer freaks. He was demonstrating the Apple II computer, which was truly watershed in the sense that it was a generic computer, like the System 360, but approachable like the Frieden Flexowriter. All in one convenient plastic molded case were all the things you needed, with no soldering required, to boot up your computer and be treated to a blinking cursor. Kind of the ultimate where do you want to go today kind of thing. And it would be up to you to write software if you wanted, so like 10, print hello, 20, go to 10, good times. Or you could have third parties that write software, and they would then be able, through this, to give you the software, and then you could do things with it. So there was an amazing moment 2 years after its introduction, 1979, Bob Frankston and Dan Bricklin introduced VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet ever. And businesses are like, I like this so-called personal computer, right? They want to run the spreadsheet, so they go ahead, they start acquiring Apple IIs like crazy. Apple has no idea why the machine is flying off the shelves. It's because external people could write code for it and share it, creating demand for it, and Apple just benefits by the fact that people are finding uses. But they have no control over what people do with the machine, and only through market research could they discover its uses. Now, Steve Jobs wasn't the only one doing this. This is Bill Gates, pictured from his storied 1977 traffic stop in Albuquerque, New Mexico. What I like about this photo are two things. One, he's got an ear-to-ear grin saying that he'll buy and sell us all someday. And second, his sense of fashion hasn't changed significantly in 30 years. And it's people like this, smiley, nerdy, poorly dressed, asocial kids that could actually start building empires with these generative technologies, technologies that anybody is invited to contribute to. They don't need a business plan. They don't have to have a meeting. They don't need a partnership. They just do it, and they see what happens. And the PC is the ultimate representation of that generativity. Here's a PC pictured from approximately 1992. You can tell it's vintage only by the presence of the 66 light there in the corner. Some people remember that with the button next to it, and you'd press it, and then it would say, turbo mode, right? Which raises the question, why don't you always want turbo mode? The answer is it makes the hamsters on the wheels inside tired as they run around. And I can't resist but tell you that they've actually now invented a hamster-powered paper shredder. You put the paper in the top, and the hamster runs on the wheel there, and it shreds the paper, and then it can live in the shredded paper afterwards. It just shows that reuse is a viable alternative to recycling. But we digress. The important feature is that that PC from 1992 or 93 has not changed significantly right up through 2008. It will run any code it is handed. And nobody, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Hewlett-Packard, Packard-Bell, you name it, none of them have anything to say about it. Once you've got that thing in your midst, you can do whatever you want with it. And that's what provided the basis for the entire off-the-shelf software market, vibrantly, and of course for other models like shareware and freeware, people just giving stuff away. And even if you're not a nerd then, as long as you've got the PC, you can benefit from that software. Now we see a similar transition from sterile to generative in our networks. So this is one of the major networks of the early 1990s. The CompuServe Information Service started as something for H&R Block's computers to do at night when they weren't being used so much. And here you can see CompuServe is not only the network provider, but the content provider. There's a main menu, and everything that you might possibly want to do is here available on this menu. You just have to use your elbow and push the mouse over to the large, oversized square for what you want. You want media or sports, why? We've got it all. And you click on the sports button, and what you see next is up to CompuServe as to what they'll give you. Just like Brother decided what was on their grid, here's the CompuServe grid determined through market forces, but no third party can sneak onto that grid and offer services unless CompuServe approves. Now that all changed with the mainstreaming of a network that may not have been intended to compete with it. You may recognize one of the people in this photo. These are three of the Internet's founders, pictured from their 25th anniversary retrospective for Newsweek, John Postel and Steve Crocker, and yes, Vint Cerf. Vint, you look informally dressed in that photo. It's just a coat and tie. And amazing to me to think that they all went to the same high school in Southern California at slightly different times. It's like we had the French club or the debate club. They had the Let's Build a Global Network club. And like, I don't know who your refreshments chair was, but it was remarkably successful. And they were able to build a network precisely without that many resources, without having the venture capital like FedEx to just bankroll the idea of how to move a package from arbitrary points overnight. They had this idea of designing a network where anybody could connect to anybody already on the network. And that form of piggybacking was a natural way to build it out if you didn't already have an entire backbone and distribution set. Now you can also see they're showing here you can build a network out of just about anything. The puzzling thing to me about this, and Vin, I'm so glad you're here to confirm or deny, it looks like your network doesn't work because it's going from your ear to his ear and then your mouth to his mouth. I'm hoping that's an inside joke rather than you guys don't know how to string tin cans together.
That was absolutely deliberate. We figured this was in Newsweek magazine, I think, in 1994, and we thought it would be really cool to put this geek joke in there just for people who figured out this network couldn't work.
Well, 10 points for me. 10 points for you, too. So put in more formal terms, using fewer vegetables, you can see here that it's hourglass architecture where Internet Protocol, not decidedly, interestingly, intellectual property, in the middle of the hourglass is just a few rules, kind of which side of the road to drive on, in essence, and then broad at the top because the idea is any application people can dream of, our only job is to hook them together. If they want to invent the World Wide Web, more power to them. They want to do email, great. They don't have to run it through our central computers where we approve these applications. An incredible, revolutionary idea, because what does it mean? It means the internet has no main menu. There's like no grid. You plug in and it's like, where do you want to go today? You get the equivalent of the blinking cursor. It assumes that the content will be provided by the people using the network, which is a puzzling but brilliant move, which made this network with no content, no CEO, and no business plan outcompete the networks that had venture capital, content, glorious icons, and committees deciding what people would want and trying to make sure that that stuff would get to them. That's the beauty of hourglass architecture. It also is something that is puzzling. Again, it's not clear it should work. The way internet architecture would move this laser pointer to the back of the room is not the way that most people would think of doing it. The way you would normally think of doing it is you'd hire FedEx and pay them a fee and they'd move the laser pointer back to the person who should have it, or like Deal or No Deal, there'd be some nice lady to take it back. On the other hand, why not just say, we are the network? And I could pass the laser pointer to Larry, who once he's out of his email would take it and pass it back, and then Fred would pass it back and would ultimately get to the back of the room. And we call this best efforts routing, also known as send it and pray, or every packet an adventure. And it's crazy, and yet somehow it works. And that's why, as late as 1992, IBM was telling its customers that you couldn't possibly build a corporate network using Internet Protocol, and why the mascot of the Internet engineers, loosely confederated into the Internet Engineering Task Force, no president, no voting, no place to sue them, just kind of a task force to build the Internet, their mascot would be the bumblebee, because the fur to wingspan ratio is clearly far too large for the thing to fly, and yet somehow the bee flies. And I'm pleased to actually report that as of last year, they've finally figured out how bees fly. We don't have time today, but I'll just say that they flap their wings very quickly. So just as there's this hourglass architecture for the network, there's also an hourglass architecture for the PC, I say. And I don't even care what operating system is in the middle. It might be the famously proprietary Windows operating system, but the fact still is you can run any application you want on top of it, and Bill Gates has nothing to say about it. You take the generative PC and the generative net and you put them together, and you get this amazing explosion of things, some of which are corporate and come from the usual suspects going online. Many, even I dare say most of which, are coming completely out of left field from poorly dressed, asocial, smiley young nerds. So for example, if a man named Jimbo came up to you in 2001 and said, I got a great idea for an encyclopedia. We start with 7 articles. Then anyone can edit it at any time. Right. You'd be like, thanks, Jimbo, we'll take that under advisement. Or, you know, 2 guys from the Netherlands are like, let's just take down the music industry, and they invent Kazaa. And then when they're done, they're like, what should we do next? Let's do Skype. The same guys do Skype. Let's take down the telephone industry. You know what they're doing today? TV, right? They're doing Juiced. It's like, who won't we attack? We are 2 guys from the Netherlands, and we will not be stopped. So you see this kind of generative blossoming. I mean, Wikipedia now is so popular that I've now actually seen it on a Chinese restaurant menu. You can have stir-fried Wikipedia with pimentos, or steamed eggs with Wikipedia. It's like, is this the dish that anyone can edit? Like, what does this mean? I have a theory on it, but I'll save it for the question and answer session. I'll just again tell you this really is a menu. So this kind of generative blossoming that we see taking place at the technical layer, I say facilitates generative blossoming at layers above it. So I'd put Wikipedia here towards the top of the hourglass at the content layer, and somehow that bee flies, even though you wouldn't expect it to. And then even way up at the social layer, you see changes taking place out of odd corners. Anybody use couchsurfing.net? A couple people, right? Couchsurfing.net solves the persistent market problem of people who want a couch to sleep on for free, matching them up with people who have couches and would like strangers to sleep on them for free. How did we get along so long without it? I don't know. Now, they say they've got 250,000 successful couch surfers, and I believe them. I don't think they're inflating the numbers. But what went through your mind when I first showed this, right? Your first question was, how many people have died from couchsurfing.net, right? That's exactly the system that Vint was talking about, that starts with openness, that says, let's give it a try and see what happens. And then there creeps in this doubt, this reverberating doubt that you can't just trust in this kind of, I thought that ended with Woodstock kind of flavor for how to build a technology or the things on top of it. And that's why we start to see a movement from generative back to sterile. So, for instance, blogs at the social layer. It was 2005 that most people hadn't heard of them, and if they had heard of them, thought they were stupid. It's like, oh, I see, blogs. That's where you can talk about your cats. My favorite cat-oriented blog is Kittlers, catsthatlooklikehitler.org. There it is. You can submit your own Kittler candidates. I've got to say, this Kittler, I think, should be #1. It has that kind of demonic stare to it and the wonderful twist of the hair. But then what starts off as completely whimsical, if you take nothing from this speech, you're going to go home and go to catsthatlooklikehitler.org. Then it gets serious. You end up with Joshua Micah Marshall doing TalkingPointsMemo.com and basically starting to drive some of the news in Washington, or Global Voices, where people from around the world can post their blog entries about what's going on, and you see people in Myanmar or in Kenya or in Tibet able to get a message out. And now through translation tools, including a new tool from Google that basically lets you invite a translator, a robot translator, into your chat room, you can bridge the divide of language and just type what you want to say to that Chinese blogger you're having an argument with, and the translator translates in the middle. Very cool stuff. Exactly as it becomes popular, it becomes worth subverting. So this is just a snapshot of some of the comments pending approval on my modest blog. You would think from these comments that my blog was pharmaceutical-oriented because there's Ambien available, more Ambien, multitasking loppier, things like that. And of course, these are left by robots by evil people who want to make it look like my blog is linking to these terrible sites that produce illegal pharmaceuticals and then raise their Google karma. So what happens when this starts to take place? The internet tries to fight back. So they invent the CAPTCHA, which is to say the computer-generated squishy green word that a computer, paradoxically, can't figure out how to undo, even though it created it. It requires human intervention. And I can put those CAPTCHAs on my blog. So it's like, I don't have many standards, but at least be a person. At least be human if you're going to leave a comment on my blog and type the word that you see. So what do the spammers do in response? The first thing they do is they start up distributed CAPTCHA sweatshops, where humans solve CAPTCHAs all day long for $2.50 an hour. And a question for us, we know that one laptop per child, Nicholas Negroponte's project, is going to countries throughout the world, Nigerian school children getting this thing, getting on the net. Would we deem it a success if it turns out that this was the primary use to which one laptop per child was being put? But it still involves people and $2.50 an hour. Why pay for something you can get for free? So the CAPTCHA people went overboard. They ended up setting up websites and applications that have free pornography. So you set up a website with free pornography, immediately visitors start apparating, and you want to show them the porn, but first they have to type what they see. Where is the image come from that they're asked to type? It comes from my blog, where the spammer wants to leave the spammy comment. They grab the image, they put it over here, the person types what they see, they take the answer, they put it over here, they leave the spammy comment, the person gets the porn, everybody's happy. If there were a Nobel Prize for evil, right, this would be like in the mad genius category, a very strong runner-up. So that thing that's happening at the, sorry, it's kind of feedbacky. That thing that's happening at the upper layers also happens at the lower layers where there's generativity. And that's why we've seen exactly as people in 2000, 2001 started getting computers running 24/7 and hooked up to very good bandwidth, they started getting subverted by viruses, by Trojans, by worms, trying to get in there and make use of those cycles or of the data on the machine. And this chart stops at 2003 because the Computer Emergency Response Team Coordination Center gave up keeping track. It was too much trouble to count them, so they now just say assume a lot somewhere up here as of 2008. Today's computers now, whether it's Mac or PC, are running huge piles of code simultaneously. And nobody, even some of the nerds in this room, has any idea what this stuff actually does or if it's doing what you think it is. If any of these pieces of software had one line added, delete the hard drive, that's it. It deletes the hard drive. Or look for spreadsheets, and when you find them, transpose numbers in the cells randomly, and then go back to sleep. How many spreadsheets would have to be corrupted that way? How many payrolls would have to be completely screwed up with the backups assiduously made of the corrupted spreadsheets before you couldn't trust any spreadsheet because you wouldn't know if the virus had gotten there or not? You start harvesting machines by getting your code on them, and here's just the control panel for a botnet. If you want to start a denial of service attack on somebody, just fill out the form for who you want to attack and when, and click Start, and away you go. We see viruses now. This is from Network World, but it reads more like a potboiler. The storm worm is fighting back against security researchers that seek to destroy it. The worm retaliates by launching attacks against them, shutting down their internet access for days. As you try to investigate Storm, it knows, and it punishes. It fights back. They're afraid. I've never seen this before, right? It's like the made-for-TV after-school special kind of writes itself. And that's in a computing magazine. Our defenses against this are still in phase 1. Basically, perimeter defense. Try to keep out everything bad, and once they're through the checkpoint Charlie, they get the keys to the kingdom. And that's why you get emails like this email I got at Harvard Law School saying that there's been an insurgence of fraudulent emails at the law school, and you have to be careful. It offers tons of advice. My favorite one is be weary of emails that have misspellings, poor grammar, or odd characters. I wrote back, I was like, I think I got one. Now I'm at Oxford. Or you see this thing as you're surfing the net, right? You see this kind of thing, and you're about to visit the website, it pops up, do you want to proceed? So be honest, we're among friends here. How many people say, yes, I'd like to proceed? Yeah, right. Vint has just raised his hand, for those of you, right. How many say no? Right. How many do the Dark Horse candidate view certificate? Right. Yeah, a couple of the nerds in the room, and then you view the certificate, you're like, that sure was a certificate. I could, print you out a certificate. You could put it on your wall and incline your head slightly to the right whenever you want to see a certificate. So this is the kind of thing that we just don't find effective in our internet security. New technologies are making this harder, not easier. My favorite new Vista virus vector is the speech recognition hole. Instead of having to move your elbow to put the mouse over the folder and click, you can say, open the folder, and it opens the folder. So you just visit the wrong website, and it's like, delete the hard drive. You're like, no, don't delete the hard drive. Yes, delete the hard drive. And you're in this existential battle with your PC because it'll run .exe. Guy named Chuck Roast counterintuitively has a website that sells fleece. His website was hacked. Here is the one line of code added to his website, which imports a virus from the counterintuitively named iSecure pages, infects your machine. You buy your fleece, you don't buy your fleece. Whatever you do, you leave the site with a worm in your machine. And now the keys to the kingdom have been gotten up. You try to tell Chuck Roast about it, he's like, would you like to buy some fleece? It's not like he's got a system for discovering this kind of stuff. The fundamental problem here is represented by this, the Cap'n Crunch Bosun's Whistle, prize in a box of Cap'n Crunch cereal from the early 1970s. After you've sugared up your child, why not have her run around the house to blow a whistle? It's like perfect partners. But it also turns out that if you cover one hole of the whistle and blow, it emits a tone at 2600 hertz, which is exactly the tone used by AT&T to indicate an idle line. Pick up the phone, dial a toll-free number, blow the whistle, dial a toll number, free long-distance telephone calling. So General Mills has a VisiCalc moment, right? Boxes are flying off the shelves because they've invented a new third-party app for the cereal, and that's a problem. Now, of course, in the 1970s, the phone network was run entirely by AT&T, so they could fix it. They were monopolists. In essence, it was a sterile network, or at least supposed to be sterile. So they made it so that the channel of communication in the network was not the same as a channel of control. There was no sound you could utter to change the network anymore. The whistle went back to being a whistle. The internet, on the other hand, is still exactly at this stage. The very pathways that carry our instant messages, our files, our web pages, our emails are also the pathways that carry .exe to run on our machines. And we wouldn't want it any other way, because when you want to see the hamster dance, you click, and the hamster needs to dance. It can't be like, within 4 to 6 weeks, we'll send you a CD-ROM, and then you can enjoy the hamster dancing. Same thing true of the internet itself. So recently, some internet service providers in Pakistan were asked to block YouTube. That happens a lot. And one of the providers took a shortcut to block it. The way the packet, the laser pointer, knows to get to the back of the room is through each of you, metaphorically, advertising whom you're near. What are your routes? I'm near the kitchen over here, so if I know that the laser pointers go to the kitchen, it gets past kitchen words, even if these folks don't know the ultimate destination. That's how internet routing works as well. So this ISP in Pakistan just changed itself to advertise to everybody, you guys want YouTube? I'm sitting right on top of YouTube. Give me your poor, your tired, your packets yearning to see cats flushing toilets. I'm going to give you YouTube. And the packets go, they throw them into a hole and forget about it. So that happened. The root advertisement cascaded outward. And then more and more places around the world, including places next door to YouTube, were sending their YouTube packets to Pakistan, where they were promptly thrown away. All because one ISP advertised a route near. It's that kind of trust that is then powerful to scale, but open to abuse. And people are still scratching their heads trying to figure out what to do about it. Richard Clarke wrote a national strategy to secure cyberspace in February 2003. It's a very long document. The first half is, we're all going to die, digital Pearl Harbor kind of thing. The second half is what to do about it, and it calls for a public-private partnership, including an IT information sharing and advisory council. Pictured here, you can see that's either Steve Case or Jack Bauer talking to the ISAC hall, and it's just like, is the internet down? I think so. Should we tell anybody? We can't. The internet's down. It's like, there's not much you can do when we are the change that we've been waiting for, as it were. That was not a paid political endorsement. So if we don't do something about this, I see the end of much of the generative aspect of the technologies that we now currently take for granted. Because not only might the government intervene with a Patriot Act for cyberspace or equivalent, but markets themselves will move. So people say, to hell with this, right? Why am I using something that Steve Jobs invented in 1977 for computer freaks as my crucial gateway onto the network? Instead, there are alternatives. New information appliances that work much more reliably, whether it's a TiVo or a Sky Plus box or a BlackBerry or a mobile phone. I mean, does this look familiar? Right? The grid is back. And the reason it's back is because this kind of device doesn't allow third-party code to run on it. It's what makes it reliable, and it also means that Motorola, in conjunction with Verizon or whomever, or Singular in this case, will determine what that menu will be and what you can do with it. The Kindle is this way. The iPod, pictured here in its native pink Naugahyde coating, is this way. The iPhone, this way, right? Welcome back to CompuServe. Where would you like to go today? We've got desktop reference. We've got et cetera. Steve Jobs doesn't apologize about this. He makes it clear that it's consumer demand that drives that form of lockdown, because you wouldn't want it to act like a PC that gets corrupted. We want it more to act like the radio that guarantees you the 3 stations you want and does it very well. But it's not just technologies that are sterile the way that the Flexowriter or CompuServe were. It's technologies that I say are tethered. Some of the benefit of the internet is built into these devices so that their makers are privileged, uniquely privileged, to update, monitor, and change them yourselves. I'm just going to give you a couple quick examples. And here's one. TiVo sues EchoStar for patent infringement. Okay, they're both DVRs. Here's the EchoStar DVR pictured here. They sue them in Beaumont, Texas. Motto of the town, plaintiffs always win. And TiVo wins. EchoStar owes TiVo $94 million in damages for patent infringement. And under secret briefs, still under seal, TiVo asks for and gets more. There's a judgment that comes out from the Texas judge that says that EchoStar is further ordered within 30 days to remotely disable the DVR functionality in all but a handful of the infringing units already in living rooms around America. So you're going to use your EchoStar DVR, you go to turn it on, and it doesn't work anymore because it has a feature upgrade that has turned it into an Echo brick. That's a way in which privileged remote access by the vendor after the fact is making our consumer technology, this is a term of art, very weird. Imagine coming down to, to your toaster to find out that, congratulations, the winter toaster upgrade has happened. You have a third slot. It's like, I guess I wanted a third slot, but that's weird, right? That's what's happening with our technologies now. You could use it to excise some portion of The Simpsons that might be deemed to defame somebody or have copyright infringement on it because the vendor has a privileged window into the machine after sale, and the regulator can affect the vendor. Example number 2, I don't know how many people have OnStar, the system in your car that gives you GPS mapping and also a little microphone in the rearview mirror, so if you've fallen and you can't get up, you push the red cross button, you say, help, help, and then this lady, actually, this is the lady, says, don't worry, help is on the way, and they know exactly where you are. That's a great story. You've seen the TV ads for it. You probably haven't heard of this case, the company versus United States of America. This is a real case. It's a strangely titled case because the company wants to remain anonymous. And it is a car services company like OnStar that was asked by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to remotely reprogram the OnStar system of a car containing people of interest surreptitiously so that the microphone in the rearview mirror turns on at all times when the car is on. So you're driving around, you're in the car, everything you say being relayed back to the FBI through an arrangement with the secret company. The company does this, then they file suit in federal district court, result under seal. They take an appeal, it goes up to the Ninth Circuit. Result, company wins. It shouldn't have to do this because the way in which they were asked to do it was if the car goes off the road and runs into trouble and the guys inside ask for help, it only goes to the FBI, not to the lady, and the FBI presumably wouldn't come help. So if you could reprogram it so that that problem wasn't there, no problemo. Other instances of the FBI asking to have cell phone microphones tapped remotely as eavesdropping tools, not just when you're on the call, of course, but just when it's in your pocket, picking up ambient noise, that kind of thing. Sometimes you've had your friends accidentally call you from the purse or something, and you get to hear them huffing and puffing as they're walking down the street, right? Now that is available without the FBI agents even having to go to the trouble of getting into a van and eating donuts and getting tired and bleary. It lowers the costs of regulations in ways that I think are, as I put it in Chapter 5, worrisome. So other interesting things happening, such as California's short-lived attempt to have people install thermostats that can be remotely triggered when there's an energy emergency to lower the temperature in your house if it's wintertime or to raise the temperature if it's summertime. The kind of thing that just feels weird to us, but that if you had already installed the thermostats and there was a heat emergency, there's no reason to expect it might not be done. Okay, part 3. Towards a middle zone here, what I call contingently generative technologies. Is this the best or the worst of both worlds? And I'll give you a couple examples of that. Even the iPod, which is famously, in my taxonomy, sterile, has third parties coding stuff around the edges. So you can get this handsome iPod connectable dog that kind of mules and moves around a little bit while your iPod music is playing. Market for iPods annually, $3 billion. Market for crap like this, $1 billion a year. Just in accessories for iPods. Last year, actually, the HMS Daring, an UK warship, put to sea, and believe it or not, it came with iPod docks and surround sound for people inside. The cost of the ship, $1 billion, doubling the market in iPod accessories in just 1 year.
I thought that was an accessory for the iPod.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes, exactly. So Steve Jobs reconsiders after people are around the edges and to the iPhone starting to hack it. And he threatens when people hack it, we will brick your phone if you hack it. We don't mean to, it just might happen accidentally. But then he says, all right, fine, we're going to have a software development kit. Third parties now can code for the iPhone, and a lot of excitement about this. But then you start to realize, what does this platform mean? It means that if you want to code for the iPhone, you have to submit your program to the new iPhone Apps Store, where it has to be approved by Steve Jobs. He can retroactively yank the approval, and if you want to charge for your software, he gets a cut. Completely different from anything Bill Gates had ever dreamed of with Windows. Here's just a fuzzy snapshot. Steve Jobs, always fuzzy. of his presentation just a couple weeks ago of the kit. What are the limitations if you're an application developer for the iPhone? Well, no more malicious, no illegal, privacy, porn, bandwidth hog, and I love the catch-all category, unforeseen. This application was unforeseen. We're going to yank it until it's more foreseeable. I had a friend who, when I was talking about the security problem among PCs, he said, you know, we license our cosmetologists. Before somebody can get near your hair and wash it, they need a license from the state. Why shouldn't we license our coders before they can write code? And that, I don't know, it sounded kind of Orwellian to me. So I was like, good idea, I'll look into it. And then I realized it's already here. It's not a state-run system, but it's run by new gatekeepers, new bottlenecks like Apple, no longer Apple Computer, just Apple Inc., that are able to run stores like this, or some of the new Web 2.0 platforms that are so cool. So here's the Facebook platform. If you are a poorly dressed, asocial, smiley young nerd today, you are not writing code to run on a PC or on an Apple or on a Linux box. You are writing code to run on the Facebook platform. That's your new operating system. And what does it mean? Well, great, you code Scrabulous. It runs on the platform, but it has all sorts of conditions attached, just like the iPhone App Store will. Facebook has the right at any time to kill your app. And if it kills your app, if you've gotten any information out of Facebook users from it, you agree to delete all that stuff. They reserve the right to charge you a fee for your app at any time, calculated however they like. And if you don't like it, that's it. You get to leave. But otherwise, it's like an all-you-can-eat salad bar, and you're halfway through your meal, and they're like, that'll be $1 million. You're free to regurgitate your meal and leave if you don't like it, but that's the deal. That's the new era that we're entering. Here's another favorite piece of the Developer Terms of Service. You represent, warn, and covenant. Covenant that the content on your application will not be obscene, defamatory, fraudulent, otherwise illegal in any jurisdiction. So if you're thinking of the Insult the Thai King app, you'd better not write it for the Facebook platform. Now, this has great features. For instance, the Secret Crush Facebook app was found to be installing adware. And lots of people, none of whom ever raised their hands, have been found to have installed the Secret Crush and then gotten something a little worse with it. So what happens within 3 days? That's it. Bye-bye. No more problem, because Facebook is at the center hub of the development platform. Again, something Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, in their early incarnations couldn't imagine doing. It also means, though, if you're one of the almost 1 million people using Scrabulous, Facebook can be asked as a matter of private litigation or public regulation, we don't like that app, it infringes Hasbro's trademark, get rid of Scrabulous. Something that Bill Gates has never been asked to do for an application running on Windows. Even now, when you put a new application in on Facebook, you're asked lots of questions about what data to share with it. You have no idea what these checkboxes mean, right? But it's kind of the illusion of control. You check some, and I think Scrabulous can publish stories in my mini feed, and then you add it, and academics have realized, wait a minute, when you add Scrabulous, it knows everything about you from your Facebook entry, but it doesn't need that just to let you guess words. That's a privacy breach, they say. And what do they recommend? Facebook should be even more squarely in the middle, running interference with every data transaction that that application wants to do with you in the name of privacy. I think it could be very helpful from a privacy standpoint, but it also means from generative, we're moving into this sterile zone, or contingently generative, where the stuff can be pulled back at any moment. So okay, last bit, what do we do about it? I'm going to give you just a scattering of ideas that comprise the third part of the book. Basically, what I've claimed is that for any layer, if it's a generative technology underneath, you have this pattern, that it starts off with the nerds in the corner, nobody thinks it's a big deal, but if anybody is interested or obsessed about it, they can contribute. Think Wikipedia. Before you know it, it hits the mainstream. Fox News at 10, a new encyclopedia you can edit yourself. And then 3 weeks or 3 months or a year later, the story, Wikipedia defames people, story at 11. And exactly as it's worth subverting, that's when the enclosure movement happens. So how do we fix this? My hope is we can reset the cycle by coming up with solutions that are themselves generative. So what are some examples? Well, there's a crazy traffic engineer named Hans Monderman in the Netherlands who came up with the idea of actually removing most traffic rules and signs in the town of Drachten. And, I mean, they were from the Netherlands, right? So they did it. And it turned out to reduce, apologies to any Dutch people, it actually reduced the pedestrian accident rate. Because what they found was when you get rid, and this is actually the experiment being done in the South Kensington neighborhood in London, when you get rid of most of this stuff, you end up with people paying much more attention as they drive. No longer are they following the rule and only the rule. They're applying a standard. They're making eye contact. And they're having a social sense for operating in the zone. Now, I don't know that this would work in Mexico City. Because the whole point, as Vint was saying, is it's a social phenomenon which requires the shared values of people being introduced to it in order for it to succeed. But when it succeeds, it's far more effective than additional police officers or speed bumps or other kind of traffic cameras or rules like that. Wikipedia has some of this magic so that an article on global warming is famously balanced. It would meet Larry's test of an easy question with an easy answer. And it's because the technology is structured so that if somebody screws it up, it's not a big deal. You can easily revert back to an earlier version of the page. And the you who does it, as long as there are more of you wanting in good faith good things to happen, you'll outnumber the people who want bad things to happen and end up winning. It also has a discussion page so that people who disagree on Wikipedia can do so in good faith, argue about it, maybe persuade the other, or if they can't, end up appealing to meta rules that say, I know you guys disagree, but you're only allowed to revert it back 3 times. And if on the 4th time you're ready to revert it back, don't. You have to wait to see if somebody you don't know comes in and sides with you and reverts the page back to your view. And those kinds of rules, developed in a kind of common law fashion, are what have kept Wikipedia a step ahead of the part of the generative pattern that creates real problems. Another example is robots.txt, a little-known standard by which websites can tell entities like Google whether or not they are to be crawled by the Google search engine so that you can have something on the web that is public to people who know the link. Anybody can get there, but they're not so public that they're present in the Google search engine or Yahoo or whoever else. And believe it or not, Yahoo and Google and Microsoft respect robots.txt, even though there's no clear legal authority saying that they have to do it or they'll be in trouble if they don't. It's just part of being neighborly, and it has avoided many, but not all, of the problems that might come up when other entities crawl your site and you don't want them to. You can see that kind of social norm creeping all the way up so that here's a site making fun of old Olin Mills photos. Remember Olin Mills? So here's one, and the caption is, bucolic meadow with split rail. Is that an animal carcass behind her? And I actually think it is, in fact, a dead cow behind her. And so it goes on with one picture funnier than the next. But somebody wrote in and actually found him or herself there and asked to have it taken down. And the person running the website was like, okay, you know, I was having fun with them, but if you prefer it not be up, I will accede to that. You could see in the real world mechanisms both analog and digital so that the problems that come up from successful generative systems have a chance to be solved by people of goodwill choosing not to be jerks. And you could see even something automated. So if this guy has this shirt, he doesn't agree to the publication of this photo, you could actually just automatically have it be that when published, it'll gray him out. You still keep the photo with the full version, but when you publish it, unless it's critical to what you want to do, you get to make a choice as to what your relationship with this person in the photo is going to be, and you see him as a person rather than just a static piece of data that you encountered on the net and immediately copied and pasted. Stop Badware that Vint mentioned, another example of trying to get people together in social configurations to attack problems, has 2 components. One is you can download software to your machine that relays its vital signs back to other machines surfing the net. So that when you encounter code on the net, instead of just having it be exe, you don't know what it is, you can ask the rest of the herd, hey, how many of you guys are running this? How many of you guys who are self-described experts have chosen to run it? How long has it been around? Is it brand new or is it 3 years old? And give you the kind of information you need to know, tempered to your risk aversion, as to whether or not to run it. So this software is in version 1 right now. It's called Herdict, Verdicts from the Herd. It's a terrible title. I'm open to new ones. And another part of Stop Badware is to actually crawl the web. We do this with the help of Google, and we look for websites like Chuck Roast that deal out those drive-by downloads looking for trouble. And when we find them, we add them to Santa's bad list here, almost 300,000 websites out there prepared to ruin your machine if you should dare to visit them. And when we do that, not only to put them on our bad list, but in conjunction with Google, Google will list them in their search results as being dangerous. So our good colleague Yochai Benkler put out this wonderful book, The Wealth of Networks. He put it out on the internet for free. in a wiki format. Somebody changed his wiki to include a virus with your visit, and as a result, Google and Stop Badware went ahead and labeled the search result, "This site may harm your computer." That turns out to lower the number of visitors to his site, because if you click on the link anyway, it takes you to this page, which says, no, really, you don't want to visit the site. Here are some suggestions. Have a cream soda, do something else. Or if you're a total nut, you can highlight and manually copy and paste the link of this site that will kill you. A very powerful thing. So what I'm saying, here's just my 30 seconds trying to be a highfalutin academic political scientist, which I'm not, by using a 4-quadrant, 2-axis grid. You have hierarchy and polyarchy, top down, bottom up. This is sterile, this is generative. Corporations go here, government often goes here. The internet in its glory goes down here. But then problems start to come up, and when they do, our first instinct is to move the solutions up, top down. Who can I pay, or who can I vote for who's going to fix this problem for me? Now, sometimes problems call for that, but my question is, can we start looking in this quadrant, which I would call the communitarian quadrant, the social norms quadrant, trying to get people bottom up to agree on certain standards that may well be universal, or as near universal as possible, of being humane to each other and solving the problems there. If we can do it there, I say, often it's better than going up here to do it. So there are problems operating in that quadrant. When you do a bottom-up thing that creates hierarchy, like our Stop Badware project, people like Chuck Roast complain. Here's his email saying that we've created the Gitmo of the internet because, he wants to appeal. He wants to claim he doesn't have badware, but we're not the government. He doesn't get his day in court. If he doesn't like it, he should urge his would-be customers to use a search engine other than Google. As you might guess, this does not appeal to him. So we are trying to figure out how do we adopt some of the due process and public-mindedness of a government while still not arrogating ourselves to that post. Same problem with Dig, and I don't know how many people use Dig. People vote for the articles they like. It's very cool. And then it turns out here is subvertandprofit.com, the website you can go to buy digs for the things you want to see rising high at $2 per dig. You pay them $2 through PayPal for every dig that you want. Half the money goes to subvertandprofit.com. Half the money goes to Dig members who have signed up to be paid to dig. And they just sit there all day long and collect $1, and they click on links to say, yeah, I vote, that's a good thing. That represents a social gap where they don't consider themselves enough of members of a Dig community not to do it. I don't know many Wikipedians that would actually take this deal. Social norms, then, tricky. You can't always convince people to do it. My favorite attempt by the publishers to change the social norms of school children so they respect copyright when they grow up is this: they should recognize their own creativity by including the copyright symbol on their coursework. Good luck with that. The alternative to this is the upper left corner, and that's things like this. The roadside cameras that detect blood pulsing inside of you, so that if you abuse the car sharing lane, you'll automatically be detected. I don't know how soon it will be till people have like pig carcasses in their right seat, and then they have to do like, nope, it detects pig blood too, that kind of thing. I would rather see a form of freedom come into this zone so that we don't feel that we have to lock down our technologies in order to save our future. Thank you very much. It doesn't work.
So I'm going to do something that's going to get everybody who organized this very upset, but let's pretend this is user-generated environment here. We don't have a lot of time, and Z has raised a lot of questions, so I'm totally happy not to talk to you and let you ask questions of Z. And I want this to be a democracy, so if you'd rather have that, please raise your hand. Oh, okay. Boy, okay, I guess I have to work. I set out this story about the relationship between technology and policy. Zittrain's book is, I think, the most important book written in this field. And it's going to set the standard for how people think about this for at least the next 10 weeks. But it's critically important that you guys understand it, and I want to set this up in the following way. So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about something Zittrain did 8 years ago. Article in the Stanford Law Review, Zittrain told a story about the problem of piracy as it relates to the problem of copyright. And Zittrain's argument was the problem of privacy is the same as the problem of copyright. Both of these problems are examples of data that has gotten out of control. Right? So in the privacy context, the data is facts about us, your name, your social security number, your age, your address, your credit card. Copyright context, the data is copyrighted material. So for example, stuff like this. Copyright owners don't like that, or they don't like this. Or they don't like this in particular. So the point is, the copyright owner had some data which other people are now doing things with that they don't like. That's a problem for copyright. It's the same problem for privacy. Now, in both cases, in some sense, it's the technology that set free what before technology helped to control. So before, privacy was protected because the costliness of search and surveillance. Copyright was protected because of the costliness of copying. So technology comes along and changes this. It changes it for the friendly ways, for privacy and copying, for copyright, and it makes it an enemy for privacy and copyright. And that change is this first step, inducing a response. The response is a response of both private people and public people. So in the context of privacy, one response to this is self-protection. You don't go out on the net much. This means you reveal less or you choose privacy-friendly sites. In copyright, the private response is digital rights management technologies or alternative business models that don't actually need to depend upon copyright. The public response in both cases would be laws. So, for example, you could have comprehensive privacy regulation for privacy, or you could have increased copyright protection for laws. And so Zittrain's point was to say, okay, we've got a private response and a public response for copyright and privacy. What do we actually see? Well, the copyright response, the private is DRM and privacy is disengage. Is that successful? DRM, not really, and in privacy, not at all successful. Do we see a public response? Yeah, in the copyright, we see a very active public response. In privacy, we see little response. And you might say, isn't that funny? Because in the copyright context, they could take care of the problem pretty much themselves, yet they get lots of government help. But in the privacy context, they can't take care of the problem themselves, but we get no government help. So this is the picture of how stuff works in Washington. Okay, so that's the old story. I want you to hold that in your head. And let me emphasize something important about what I call Z-theory, which is Zittrain theory, as you might guess. So Zittrain's book, The Future of the Internet, and the only reason I came is to make sure you recognize it's Creative Commons license, so you can download it freely on the net and do anything you want with it for non-
You buy it.
And the point that Zittrain's book is making, obviously, is that we're going to have these really critical choices about how we deal with the net when, in fact, all of this badware takes over. Well, there's a very important cost as it relates to the earlier story. That's a cost to privacy, right? So the cost to privacy, we can imagine by thinking about this statute. You might recognize the statute. It's the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001, otherwise known as the Patriot Act. And many people, when they passed the Patriot Act, said, well, you know, how did you write such a long law so quickly? And the answer was, they didn't write it quickly. The statute was sitting in a desk drawer at the Department of Justice waiting for an emergency, and then like magic, they dropped it onto the floor of the House, and it was passed. Okay. Now, it might lead you to wonder, after you read Zittrain's book, is there the same act for the internet, which you might call the I-Patriot Act, sitting in somebody's drawer in the Defense and Department of Justice, waiting to be enacted when this creature spreads itself out on the internet? Well, I had the chance to actually have dinner with this guy, Richard Clark, that Jonathan already mentioned, and asked him, told him Zittrain's theory, and said, so is there such an act? And he said, of course there is, and Vint Cerf is not going to like it very much. So the point is, there is this plan, and the plan is to reorder cyberspace when this event happens, this 9/11 event happens, to make it so the government can get what it wants out of the internet, contrary to the generative character of the internet. And the way the government thinks about it is in ways like this. In order for cyberspace to be policed, internet activity will have to be closely monitored. This is one member of our government that says that. That would mean giving the government the authority to examine the content of any email, file transfer, or web search. All data the government has to have access to. That's what they say. Privacy is a zero-sum game, according to our government. Now, here's the argument I want to make. First, I agree with Zittrain. This 9/11 event is going to happen. No good reason that it hasn't happened so far, and there's lots of reason to think that it will. When it does happen, we're going to face a choice. The choice is, what would the future look like? There's a good choice here and a bad choice here. The good choice is that we find a way to protect privacy and security. The bad choice is that we accept the government's framing of this to say there's a substitute for privacy and security. We can't do privacy anymore, so let's just do security. Critical thing is to see that we need to prepare for this choice now. Okay, that's point one. Point two, well, how do we prepare? I think we prepare by learning something about what Jonathan taught us in 2000. If copyright is really like privacy, then if you think about the copy fight, the fight against how copyright law applies, this starts with the recognition that copyrighted data is out of control. That's the point Zittrain was making. The response of many of us in the copy fight is to get people to accept that, or in the words of the Sun CEO or chairman, to get over it. That's what we want to tell Hollywood. We want to tell Hollywood, get over it. Get your protection for copyrighted material in other ways. We want the copyright industry to find a different response to this rather than to try to control copying. What they want to do is they want to build technologies to stop this copying. They want to break the internet. And they'll do whatever it takes to stop this copying, what they think of the internet as the most massive machine of copyright infringement ever. And we copy fighters say to them, you don't need to do that. You don't need to break the internet. You can protect copyright, or at least protect the interests of copyright in other ways. We don't have to stop copying. We can protect it through things like collective licenses, whether voluntary or compulsory, or different business models, and recognize maybe even freer might help you in your business. But we don't have to essentially kill the essential character of the internet to protect this one tiny industry with this very old, and there's the font, business model. Okay. So that's the story we copy fighters say to the copyright industries. The thing Zittrain's article makes us recognize is the privacy fighters need to see the same point is true for privacy. Two solutions to the problem of privacy. If the problem is private data getting out of control, one solution is to break the internet. The other solution is to give an alternative protection for privacy. So privacy activists, privacy nuts, and I count myself as one of these too, respond to this first in just the way Hollywood responds to the internet. They want to break the most important aspects of the net's efficiency here. And the question is, we should ask, can we provide the interests, the values of privacy without blocking the gathering of data? So again, if the copy fighters, like me, tell Hollywood, live without controlling copies, is there a way for privacy nuts like me to live without blocking the gathering of data, to provide the value of privacy without controlling the gathering of data? Well, I think there's a maybe is the answer to this. The outlines to the answer is to think more in a more sophisticated way about traceable anonymity or pseudonymous anonymity, right? So with a proper showing, we have to link back, but without a proper showing, there's no way to link back to the identity of the person who's done something on the net. Now, essentially, this is what we have. I mean, you guys get orders from courts to reveal who did what on the internet, and you have to comply with those orders in some contexts. But the problem is that existing system is insufficiently secure. There's no way that people can actually reliably believe that the links aren't being made in a proper way. We need to make that more secure. So what do we need to make it more secure? Well, I think we have to see that each side needs to give something. So the privacy nuts like me need to give this. We need to imagine a world where we can gather whatever we want to gather and do with whatever we want to gather, whatever we have gathered. Gather whatever data we want, do with it whatever we want, so long as we don't make a link back to a particular identity, unless there's a strong showing by some independent third party that this link back to an identity is required. So we're controlling the use of the data in one particular way about the link back, but freeing up the use in all sorts of other ways. The give from the government is accountability, ability to trust the government. Because if the government can't be held responsible for breaking the rules, there's no reason that we should ever trust them. That was the real purpose of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. Its purpose was to constitutionalize rules that meant the government would be held responsible if the government violated our privacy without the proper court authority. This was a mechanism of trust, circa 1791, producing a transparent process, the warrant, and severe penalties for anybody who broke the rule. So in the world I'm talking about, we have rules that allow the gathering of data, just rules about regulating how data is used, and that would preserve the liability for anybody who fails to follow those rules. Now, these gives then present this problem. In the short term, neither of these parties is going to give what they need to give. The privacy nuts are going to ignore the inevitable I-911, which again is not Al-Qaeda. They don't have technology cool enough to do anything like this, but will be some Russian mafia that just lets their stuff get out of control. The government is going to ignore the better system they could get here and continue to do things, idiotic things like pushing for immunity when it turns out they force people to violate the rules. So this produces this stalemate where neither side can actually advance in a way that makes privacy better. And that's where I think we are right now, this stalemate. Okay, now here's the argument of what's needed. Was that actually a modem? Cool. You guys have modems? So what's needed in this, one final minute, in this debate is some kind of leadership, right? Leadership for people who know something about the technology and understand something about this policy. That means, of course, you, right? And I don't mean your company, like Google. It's not what I'm talking about. I mean literally you, right? You people who spend your life doing code and living in this space. You need to fight against this ignorance that defines the guys who work a couple, 10 blocks away from here, right? The ignorance of this fallacy that we have a world of either privacy or security. This fallacy is something you need to teach is a fallacy. By better coding, that gives us something of both, but better coding that gives us something of both right now, because we're about to live in this moment of relative peace, moment of transformation in this new administration, at least 100 days, where they're going to listen, 100 days where there's an opportunity to set some kind of direction forward rather than this direction backwards, right? And our objective here should be to find this choice, or at least your responsibility here is to get this government to make the choice in the way that doesn't force us to sacrifice privacy in the name of the inevitable demand for security. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Stephen Balcom with the Family Online Safety Institute, one of the co-hosts. Could you get your questions ready? We have 1 or 2 microphones. Where are the microphones? While you're getting your questions ready. Guys, are your microphones working?
No, we just bellow. We could bellow.
Okay, oh, look, I think okay, well, do we have any hands yet for questions? Because we want to get the microphones out as quickly as possible. All right, well, while you're thinking of one, let me start, Jonathan, with a question. Let me just start. Are you okay?
We have to stand near each other.
This will be very collegial.
I feel like I'm in an infomercial. I'm so glad you asked, Stephen.
So in your book, which I have read, I was very impressed with you, both of you. Well, you made a reference to kid-friendly browsers that Larry mentioned some time ago, and you also talked about how tethered appliances could actually help in terms of age verification of kids. So one of the problems that we have out on the web, of course, is porn, as you mentioned before. MySpace and 49 state AGs helped to create a task force, which I'm on, and only met for the first time a week ago. Right. So how do we thread the needle in terms of protecting kids online while protecting free speech? Kind of the privacy security dichotomy that we just had.
Yeah.
So have a go at that.
I'd love to see intermediaries be willing, maybe under some pressure, to take more responsibility for ensuring that environments, particularly ones designed to attract kids, are ones where when kids themselves sniff out trouble there, they can report it and have the reports dealt with seriously. I think you're absolutely right that a world of tethered appliances is one that, because it's more regulable generally, is better able
to have the person register the iPhone as an adult iPhone or just a regular iPhone, and only the adult iPhones get to do X, Y, or Z. Or maybe you register specially a phone as a kid phone, kind of like the kid-friendly browser, and then the destinations the phone might go, the places the phone might call, are limited through the central orchestration of the phone vendor so that the kid-designated phone can't get there. That is one benefit of living in a tethered world. I would just love to see as much of that benefit produced in the generative world through many more intermediaries willing to take it up. I don't know if you have a thought, Larry.
Well, so the kids mode browser that I was talking about is a browser that depends upon sites actually tagging themselves as sites where there's harmful to minor stuff. That means there's a law. And that's the thing that it's impossible usually for technologists to imagine, which is kind of bizarre, right? Technologists spend their life arguing with God, like, okay, how much can we actually get on this chip? And I don't care what the laws of nature say, I'm going to try to beat it. But when you switch over to try to get them to imagine actually changing the law or using the law as one of the tools that could help them achieve what they're trying to achieve, it's like, no, that's impossible. I can never do anything like that, right? And this solution actually requires two things to happen at once. One, that the law actually effectively says sites that have got harmful to minor material have got to tag it in just a simple tag of HTM and then close HTM. That's the stuff that might be harmful to minors. And then a browser, recognizing that, blocks it. The advantage of that over what we've got is that it's narrowly tailored to exactly the speech that we should be blocking, namely harmful to minor speech, not slang. If you look at the RSAC ratings, slang or bad speech or anything else, it's just exactly the speech we want. It's a relatively minimal burden on websites, not a zero burden, but a minimal burden, but only a burden on websites that have the material and does not burden anybody who has a constitutional right to the material, because you don't have to use a kids mode browser. So the interaction is the part that I think is critical, and opening up the space for that conversation is even more important.
Questions? Yeah.
Okay, I could walk up there, I guess. My question is about the chart that you put up.
Come on up. Your mother will be proud.
Great to see you. Now you want to get as close to the price as possible without going over.
I'll try. My question was about the grid that you put up that compared the ways that we've decided or that have worked in regulating privacy or copyrighted data. And what was interesting, you pointed out that there's been lots of laws about this, so people who can kind of handle it. And what I also thought was, well, that's because there's a lot of incentive. There's a lot of monetary incentives. So is it possible that people just don't individually value privacy the same way that the record company values copyrighted material or something like that? And I'd like to, and how then do you, if it's, people put up blog posts and they put up MySpace pages that are full of private data, but so where is the value, and how do you explain that to people if they don't understand it?
Well, I think obviously people value them differently, but the point of Zittrain's article was to say, given people value it differently, what should the government be doing in response? So because the copyright industry values it so heavily, they've got a really significant incentive on their own to deal with the problem without a lot of help from government. And private individuals, though, even if they value privacy, don't have a lot of opportunity to do anything about it without a help from government. So that's the only point is where you'd expect government to actually be doing something if the government were anywhere close to rational would be more on privacy than on copyright. But in fact, you see exactly the reverse. We've had no major privacy legislation in general.
The alternate explanation that people actually don't care. Otherwise they would.
No, I don't think that follows. I don't think you can make that inference, right? Otherwise they would. Well, if it's really costly to do something about privacy, no, it's not clear otherwise they would. But the point is, if you lower the cost of doing something about privacy almost to zero and then find they don't do anything about it, then I think you'd have an argument.
Yep, right at the back there.
Thanks, Ray. Hey, Jonathan, out here. Let's go back to your original thesis about generative internet versus common appliances. And you set up this dichotomy in your book that you have this interplay between these two models. But you seem to be saying is that it's almost you create a bit of a, I'll try. You create a bit of a false choice, in my opinion, because you seem to make it sound as if like we have a choice of an either or here, generative or tethered appliance. But you also don't make the case, I think, that there's something terribly wrong with a lot of these tethered appliances. You mentioned TiVo and iPod. You open the book with, or iTunes, you open the book with that, you end the book with that. A lot of people like their TiVos and their iTunes, their iPhone. So isn't there something to be said for the fact that millions of people out there aren't like us, don't want a purely generative experience? I mean, hey, I've got 3 blogs, but my mom and dad don't, and a lot of other people don't. So what's wrong with the TiVo and the iPhone?
So thank you, Adam. Adam's question, which is a useful question in many contexts, which is, why don't markets solve this all the time? Markets, yay. And I like markets. I'm in favor of markets. I don't want to get struck by lightning by saying otherwise. However, I think there are ways in which in this environment, consumers and others may make decisions that are actually the wrong ones for the ecosystem, even as they are fully rational as market decisions. And there's a couple ways in which that happens. One is, when you buy your generative computer, it's rare that you will have in mind the unexpected surprises that may make you happy you got it later, but at the time you buy it, precisely because they're unexpected surprises, it's not foremost in your mind. And my belief then is, as a matter of behavioral economics, people will systematically underestimate the value of surprising good future things that are inchoate, even though were they to materialize, they would be very glad that they did. I think there's also a sense in which much of the IT infrastructure that's generative has traditionally been offered through, say, corporations, where you're sitting at your desk in your cubicle and you can load Skype up on your corporate machine or do email on your corporate machine before you even had a computer at home. And maybe that's an agency problem. The corporation will be like, get back to work. You shouldn't be having flying toasters on your screen. But I think often the leading edge of these innovations is when people can take it up using other people's hardware. And if the corporation had an easy alternative to a sterile device, it might well take it, and then you wouldn't have the substrate ready to take up those new innovations whose success is premised exactly on other people taking it up. One person with Skype is like one person with a fax machine. It's like a waffle iron with a phone attached. It's like, who am I going to fax today? So those are reasons why I think the market could lead us astray. And finally, I at least want to be part of the market then. The ideas that I put forward that are bottom up in the sense of I'm not looking for government intervention yet. I want to see stop badware work and partnerships, or implementing new technical protocols so people can make different choices when they're online. All of that could be part of a market. It just might emerge from non-market sources, just like nobody was going to do Wikipedia unless they were as crazy and non-market oriented as Jimbo.
And my question is, I guess in your Facebook example, it seems like that's a closed universe, a sterile environment within an open environment. So I guess I don't really have a problem with them having their own set of rules in their own little part of the universe, because I can go play Scrabble somewhere else if I want. So it's just a comment.
Yeah. The comment is, why be that troubled by closed environments so long as they're part of open environments? The part of an open environment is that we can tolerate intolerance, sort of thing. And I agree with that. I actually wholeheartedly agree with that. Going back to Adam's original question, I like my TiVo. I have 3 TiVos and a sling box so that when I'm overseas, I can watch the TiVo that's in Cambridge, somewhere else. And it's great. It's an appliance and it works. My worry, though, is that the ecosystem won't remain in balance, that if enough people find reason to abandon the generative PC, and they do so either because they've got enough other devices hanging off their person, all of which are sterile, that do what they want to do, they don't need it, or that the PC just becomes a lockdown browser. As long as I have a browser, I can do whatever I want. Remember, like a year ago or 2 years ago, if you were told you could be on the internet, but all you were allowed to do was be on a browser, that would be like a burden. Like, how would you do your word processing? Maybe your email is, Outlook or Eudora. Today, there's Google Mail and Google Docs and Google Spreadsheets, and they're inventing something right now, 2 rooms over, that will substitute for Quicken. So that seems good, but it also raises the specter later where I wonder if Facebook regrets a little bit of how contingent the generativity is when they're facing angry lawyers from Hasbro and they are in a position to do something about it, or how much we might regret, if not in the United States, where I completely discredit the Inspector General of the Department of Justice who says that national security letters are routinely abused. I don't think anything could ever go wrong here. However, in China, the idea that our technologies are having cars roll off the assembly line, each one with OnStar, and a mobile phone network where the head of China Mobile in the World Economic Forum gets up, he's like, it's so cool. We can tell how many people attend a rally just by counting the cell phone signals, and we know who they are. And there was like this silence in the room. People were like, and he was like, isn't that cool? And Ed Markey got up and was like, sir, isn't that a privacy problem? And he was like, no, we only give the information to the government.
Yeah, at the back there. While the microphones, can you just quickly have say something about the network? You have some interesting concepts in the book about what's in the middle and what's on the exterior now.
Yeah.
And the role of ISPs, if you could quickly mention that.
So people like Vint brought us so-called end-to-end theory, which started off as a technical observation that instead of trying to keep revising the internet protocols through like version 7.0, now with a paperclip, like, it looks like you're writing a ransom note. Would you like help with that? It's like at some point, it's like, I want a damn word processor. Keep it simple. And the internet had that idea that says, in the middle, it should be kept simple. Just route the damn packets. Don't get smart. Let all the intelligence be at the endpoints. That's become a political rallying cry, too, for network neutrality and such. And I'm in favor of that. I do say in the book that middle and endpoint are starting to get very confusing, because you're holding a device that sure feels like an endpoint. It's an object. It's like a mobile phone. But because the network can reach out and change the way it works and you can't, it's sort of in the middle from a sense of centralized control. And stuff in the middle sometimes might be thought of as an endpoint. So end and middle are starting to get very confusing, which means simple application of end-to-end theory is starting to get pretty weird.
My name is Joshua Breitbart. I'm with the Digital Expansion Initiative in New York City. Very much enjoyed this discussion. My question is about the trend with Verizon opening up access to their handsets and now having won the C-Block auction. Seems to be there's a movement in that direction from sterility towards generativity. I wondered you could comment on that.
Yeah, and I celebrate that. I mean, the devil will be in the details in the fine print, but I think it's terrific that Verizon, and I'm glad I corrected it to singular in the presentation, which was what that screen snapshot was, although at the time Verizon hadn't yet seen the light. I'm glad that they're going generative. Of course, we would be remiss to our hosts if we didn't say Android. Android's really cool, and Android is an open platform designed to fill in Google Android, and you'll see what I mean. So that's great. My worry, though, is that they're not worried enough about the abuses of those open platforms, because these things don't start in backwaters. It's like prime time for every Verizon subscriber that's just renewed their contract for another 2 years and has a new phone. And not having that time to kind of burble up and work out the kinks may mean that 1 or 2 missteps of terrible code on these Android phones, and Steve Jobs is like, see, this is why I'm Steve Jobs and you're not. So I've talked to some people about this. I mean, Eric Schmidt, when asked about this, his reaction is just like, no, we've come up with a solution to that. No, Google phones will be safe. And, I'd like to believe that. And I see the people around him going like, yeah, safe. So there's still work to be done, I think, that will require a social component if the generative enterprise is to actually succeed.
Yeah, the other part that is important to think about, both the cell phone network and the internet, and one of the reasons why it's so important Google has been a big supporter of network neutrality, is to recognize how the open generative network affects investment decisions. So a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, when deciding whether to invest in a technology that will only come to life 2 years from now or 3 years from now, has to have in his head, will it be allowed for this application to run unfettered on this network? And one of the reasons why places like Facebook face an innovation problem is that if Facebook really can, without any problem, suck up all the rent or the value that's produced in any application, then a lot of rational venture capitalists are going to say to themselves, why should I be investing in this kind of platform? So the great thing about the network, the open end-to-end network, is that if nobody owns the network and nobody can say, you got to pay my tax before you can run your application, many more people will be investing in bringing up great new applications. But the more the network becomes like Facebook, or the more the network becomes like the cell phone network, the less venture capitalists are going to be interested in investing in this platform, because they know if it turns out to be a great new application, we can just tax it and say the only way you can run is if you pay us our tax. Now, I don't know what the open cell phone network really will be like. It sounds like it's supposed to be more like the internet. I don't know how we got that virus into the head of the cell heads, but the cell heads have never been people who've embraced the idea of an open platform that they can't control. All of their platforms right now are platforms that you need permission of the cell network to run applications on it. And if they've really gone the other way, that's amazing, but I'm skeptical. But the key thing is to get people to focus on the growth that comes from it. This is the market growth that comes from a platform where innovation is open. And that's the real value. And again, the work you've been doing in network neutrality is critical.
Some of you will remember that Jonathan put up a chart that had layers in it, with the kind of I remember what were the four. You had social at the top.
Social,
content,
protocol, and hardware.
And protocol and hardware. Okay. So what might be important about this discussion is recognizing when and where constraints and tethering take place, because some of the comments that you made are more appropriate at the ISP layer. A lot of the openness of the internet is a consequence of a network that doesn't try to interpret the data, does not try to inject any control, other than the kinds of things you need for normal network management. I can understand that the openness there doesn't necessarily automatically translate into the application layer or content layer. So we've got a mixture of places where there could be controls or there might not be controls. One of the scariest things for us at Google is observing the vectors by which malware actually enter into people's computers. It used to be that the attacks were at the lower layer, sort of at the IP layer, people sending Christmas tree packets that caused the operating systems to become confused. Now what's happening is that as you surf around on the internet, your browser is the open sore into which the infection is injected, because the natural way of moving around the net is to download something. That was the whole point about this giant engine that copies everything, because that's how it works. But what it copies is software which gets interpreted or executed at the browser level. And if the browser is unable to constrain the effects of that ingested software, you end up with things like zombies and botnets and the like. So we can see already that technical measures are needed to limit the excursions that this ingested software can take. And that's not going to be a perfect solution, but there's no question in my mind that that is an avenue we should be pursuing as a community in order to at least use some technical measures to constrain the freedom with which this ingested software can execute. And that will help allow the openness to happen while at the same time protecting at least against some of the worst abuses.
So I'm afraid I have to jump in and say that we need to wrap up. But first of all, thank you all for coming. We're going to have a reception next door, through these doors, through those doors, and we hope you'll stick around. Also, there will be copies of this book available, so please join us in the lower left-hand quadrant.
You can also just download it. You don't have to buy it.
No. Buy the book. They will be. You can't get a signed downloaded. Well, maybe. And finally, as a longtime sort of internet policy geek, I just want to say it really doesn't get much better than this. So thank you guys, thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our speakers. Thank you all.